Well, it's great to see everybody. I'll tell you, for all the awardees, congratulations. How about a round of applause for both our corporate and military awardees? It's really awesome. So for Andy, for Admiral Brown, and for John and Bill for your leadership at NDTA, thanks for all that you do. All the corporate members. 75 years, the association, the National Defense Transportation Association, has been linking commercial capacity at every level, networks and the whole 9 yards, right, with the Department of Defense to be able to project and sustain combat power on a global scale. Really an impressive relationship, and I really appreciate it. As I look across the crowd tonight, it just reminds me of what it takes in the nation, across the nation, to be able to conduct that level of operation, to be able to project power globally, which is a national strategic comparative advantage for the United States. I apologize, I was a little late getting here today. It was a bit of a battle to get here. You know, last year and this year, we scheduled NDTA fall meeting right on top of the Secretary and the Chairman's SLC, SSS meeting, and I actually had to skip out on 2 meetings today. Admiral Mewborn flew that way last night. I flew this way and fought the traffic getting in here this morning. But it's great to be with you. I did not want to miss this great venue 2 years in a row because I had to miss it last year. But it's great to see everybody. It's great to see so many friends. General Handy, it's good to see you, sir. You know, the longest standing TCCC and transformational at that. It's always wonderful to see you back in the crowd. Honorable Estevez, good friend. So many great leaders and frankly, some great mentors along the way. I won't get the chance to talk to and announce every one of you, but you're all great leaders in your own right. And our component commanders that are represented here today, and our Director of Logistics Agency, which carries a big weight for the department. And of course, our SELs, Chief France, and all that, he brought the SEL panel together. And the training, I understand, has been phenomenal. Got a report back that Secretary Chow had a great day yesterday. I really appreciate her coming out and all the folks that came out and spoke this week. So what I want to do is I want to save a little bit of time for Q&A. I've got a couple charts up front. I can frame the discussion for you. We spent yesterday and the day before really talking about the National Defense Strategy and the irreversible momentum. I can tell you Secretary Esper is fully committed to that document and what we need to move it forward and cement change for the department. But before I start to talk about anything, let me see if I can fire up the crowd. Let me go to the video here.
All stations dismissed, all stations dismissed. Be advised, there is a shot on Alpha Golf 1010. Acknowledge.
ECG, this is TA1. Requesting a 9-line medevac. Over.
5.
I point out that our ability to project military power globally at our time and place of choosing is a strategic comparative advantage unparalleled by any other nation. Transcom's #1 priority is warfighting readiness, and our purpose remains unchanged: to project and sustain military power globally at our time and place of choosing. Our strategic comparative advantage is inextricably linked to our industry partners. Together, we will deliver. All right. That's what we do. This group is clearly part of that and much more. So now that I know that the special effects person has the ability to turn the lights down, if you could dim those lights just a little bit, I feel like I'm at an unfair advantage because I can't see you and you can see me. So I can't tell when you're falling asleep and when you're awake. So if you could just, I'd love to be able to just kind of read the audience a little bit. I appreciate that. So let me run through a few slides with you. I'll frame a couple of things that I think are important from a strategic perspective, and then I'll save time for some Q&A here. So it starts with strategy. I talked about the effort that the Secretary is focused on the defense strategy. And of course, the Chairman's endorsed the military strategy. It reintroduces for us, when Secretary Mattis published it, and you can hear his voice when you read it, the concept of strategic competition. Not in the sense that, in the 2+3 construct, particularly with China and Russia as the top two potential adversaries, not with the intent of going to war with China and Russia, but the intent of competing today to create the conditions to deter and not have to. But clearly delineating that the department's mission, number one mission, is to establish a combat credible force that can secure our national objectives on a global scale, that can defend the homeland, that can deter conventionally, deter strategically, can compete, but if necessary, can respond, right? Respond immediately and then respond with immediate force, and then respond with a decisive force when needed. And it describes a set of conditions that are different than what we've been used to over the last couple of decades, in that the logistics, the warfighting function of sustainment and logistics must be successful under persistent all-domain attack. That's a fundamental shift for the way that we've operated previously. So that shapes the way we think about the future. We continue to conduct operations today. That's not today's fight. But as we emerge to the future, we spend a considerable amount of time thinking about that. And what does that mean to this end-to-end value chain that does include our commercial partners that are so critically essential to our success? Next slide, please. I remind everybody that the only reason that we exist is to project and sustain the joint force. I tell the Secretary I think I have the best job in the joint force, to be honest with you, particularly yesterday as we went through and had a discussion with all the combatant commanders and the service chiefs and the joint chiefs. Transcom was actually built on the premise of global integration, which is one of the concepts inside the document. I have the authorities, the assigned forces, and the resources to operate day in and day out within the construct of the strategic priorities as directed by the Secretary and the Chairman. It's an incredible capability. You see it every day. The ability to shift to the east, focus on CENTCOM, the ability to shift to the west, Indo-PACOM, or any other particular issue that happens to come. And our great airmen and soldiers and sailors and Marines and Coast Guardsmen that are out there every day, and our commercial partners that are that agile and adaptive to be able to respond to dynamic force employment is really, I think, held in amazement by everybody, but particularly by our adversaries. And I think as our adversaries look at the United States and the United States military, there are a lot of things to admire. We have great leaders, great non-commissioned officers. We have great technology and weapon systems. But the things that I think they focus on the most, that they really admire the most, is this ability to conduct global command and control on a global scale, this incredible network of allies and partners that we have across the globe, and then our ability to project power at the time and place of our choosing. And for us, that never changes. The environment may get more complex. We may introduce contested environments in the way we plan and the way we conduct analysis and the way we conduct operations. But the purpose doesn't change. And you can kind of see as we evolve from left to right And back in the day, right, we didn't need logistics organizations. It wasn't very complex. You could forge your way through. But today, that's not the case. And when I look at the far right, and you look at, when you think about the ability to launch bombers from the continental United States to strike targets in North Africa and return to the continental United States without ever landing in a sovereign territory with 5 area refuels, that's an incredible capability. But it requires a global integration and synchronization of resources that are positioned across 3 different continents. When you think about 2 weeks ago, and hopefully most of you read it in the paper, the ability of a critical care team, an incredible medical capability, plussed up on board a C-17 aircraft that flies from the continental United States into Afghanistan, picks up a patient at Bagram, double amputee who had received 100 units of blood, right, would have never made it under the old construct. Flew that patient all the way back to Texas with 2 area refuels. That's the kind of reach that the United States of America has today and will have into the future. And it's your great warriors that can do that and do that day in and day out, complemented by our industry partners. Next slide, please. As I think about the command, but then more about the joint deployment enterprise, the framework that I think about it is really through this lens right here. First and foremost, it's a global posture, a network, not just an en route network enabled by military capability, but an en route network enabled by commercial networks, global trade networks, and so forth and so on, and the incredible relationships with our like-minded partners and allies across the world that allows us to expand this logistics network to a global scale. That's what gives us the flexibility to move in one direction or the other direction. Complemented, of course, by our mobility platforms. It absolutely amazes me every day what the air component can do when they get a high priority mission that comes down from the Joint Staff, one of the 2 I may have mentioned, or many, many others, and execute an in-system select, a crew, an airframe, in motion, on task, redirected to a higher priority mission, moving in a different direction. That is really incredible amount of dynamic capability, and they make it look really, really seamless. And then key to all this, to be able to optimize a global network, is global command and control. Not at the COCOM only, but at echelon, at every single echelon throughout. Now, the ability to respond in that kind of way, either whether that's an immediate response tonight or whether that's a decisive response over a more deliberate time frame, it's key to deterrence. Our adversaries know that we can come, if we have the will, that we can come. And things like dynamic force employment, our ability to move every single day. Very few people, even in the department, have a good sense for how much activity is going on inside this mobility enterprise. How many brigades or batteries are moving? How many fighter squadrons are conducting operations moving across the ocean? And it's equally challenging for our adversaries to decipher what's going on inside this mobility enterprise and our ability to hide a needle in a needle stack when we need to. It's an incredible capability as a strategic deterrent. It clearly demonstrates our ability to respond if we needed to respond. Our commercial industry partners are a key part of this, as you well know. I was at the Port of Jacksonville last week, 2nd Brigade, 1st Cav Division, out loading to Europe, right? Incredible operation to see an entire Armor Brigade combat team queued up there, getting ready to load up on 3 different vessels. Next slide, please. And what I tell people, right, is some of the things I already mentioned to you about a strategic comparative advantage. I think this audience clearly gets that. And the way we have to think about the emerging joint operating, which is fundamentally different. But what a lot of people don't realize is this inextricable link to our commercial industry partners that play such a vital role Some more critical than others, I might add, but all consequential in some way. Which really means that this forum, this NDTA relationship that links our defense transportation providers with the department in a meaningful kind of way to communicate effectively is really, really powerful. And again, Admiral Brown, I appreciate what you do there. Next slide, please. So this is the way we see it. I asked the team to go back and look and see what kind, this doesn't measure performance, but it does measure a level of activity in different portfolios. And then where you see the arrows really indicates where we see that trend either at today or headed into the future. I can tell you that as the department looks at concepts, you know, global integrated concepts and dynamic force employment, the intent really is to increase and continue to increase the level of movements and activity. You've seen a lot of that, obviously, with Europe. You'll see some of it spiking now with Indo-PACOM as well, as they look at different kind of CONOPs. You do get a sense for the amount of activity, though, which is quite significant. I actually look at every single, in each of these, and I might add multimodal is probably in the wrong location. That's mode agnostic by design, but nonetheless, you get a sense for the dollar value. I look at every single one of these portfolios, and I look at every single carrier, right? I look at volume, and I look at performance. And I ask the team who's performing well, who's not performing well, what are the issues, what are those fundamental issues that could affect our ability to project power. We have discussions about this. And if needed, the great thing about this venue, if needed, I can reach out and talk to any one of you CEOs, and we can have a discussion. You do the same with me, and I appreciate that very much. Okay, next slide, please. Been a lot of discussion over the last couple of years, really beginning with General McDough, right, on cyber and cyber resiliency. When we talk about all domain, multi-domain, contested environments and those kinds of things, cyber is an area where we pay particularly close attention based on that being a vulnerability of potential consequence. So we very much appreciate, right, and you can appreciate the evolution in our contractual language, but not just that, but in our relationships and information sharing about patterns and trends, cyber hygiene, these kinds of things. And so this is the way we see it based on the feedback. These are self-reporting feedbacks, and I appreciate the level of collaboration in this area. Okay, still a lot of work to do. What I would tell you in the area of cyber is we're never done, right? We're just never done as we work through the resiliency here. There's no silver bullets here. We continue to work through cyber hygiene, cyber defense. We're realigning our architectures, moving to the cloud, many initiatives to buy down cyber risk for the joint deployment enterprise, and particularly U.S. Transcom. Next slide, please. A couple topics of interest that are relevant in the day. Many of you, I think all of you, if these are in your portfolio, are tracking these. Sea-lift recapitalization of the organic fleet, but it has a trickle-down impact on the commercial fleet that's out there today, as Congress gave it the authorization to procure 7 used vessels to bring into the ready reserve fleet. We're working to accelerate that. I've had several discussions with the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Spencer of the Navy. Matter of fact, Secretary Spencer was very instrumental in this most recent turbo activation of 32 ships with Wet and Buzz Busby and the team. Really great effort there. If you're not aware, there might be an initiative out there to improve household goods. I can tell you all the service chiefs are very interested in this. Service secretaries are very interested in this. If you're not aware, then that means you don't read the papers, and that's probably okay too. But what we're doing in the household good area, just to be clear on this, is is restructuring our relationship with industry. And I know there's a lot of myths and perceptions and rumors out there on what it means and what it doesn't mean. What it should mean, first and foremost, is that we're focused on our North Star, which is our military members and their families, to be able to give them a quality experience even in the peak season, which has never been the case in the current construct. Point number two is we're restructuring our relationship with industry so that we have a clear means to hold industry accountable for a deliberate, defined set of metrics of performance. And frankly, that helps everybody, right? And then the third thing we're really doing here is inside the Department of Defense, where we've got a very bifurcated levels of responsibility inside the department, is we're cleaning up the levels of responsibility inside the department too. So overarching as we move to a single global household good contract, that's the intent there. We'll move over that in the next couple of years. Aerial refueling, always a stressed area in the mobility portfolio. There is some discussions out there about the potential of a craft-like, a commercial augmentation-like capability that's being explored today. And then digital modernization. Admiral Brown and I have been talking a little bit about inside of this group. You know, we focus on sea lift and airlift and other things like that. But consequential to Transcom success is this global command and control construct. And I'd like to focus more effort on getting ideas to the table about how we modernize IT, accelerate our move to the cloud, remediate cyber risk, and move in that direction, a direction really that allows us to harness data, big data, advanced analytics, machine learning, potentially AI in the future. But that journey's got to begin today. And so I really look forward to that level of dialogue and that reshaping, I think, with our relationship with NDTA. Okay. I think that might be the last slide. I think it is. So let me just say, again, in this level of strategic competition, you are all at the center of this strategic competition, whether you realize it or not. And so if you look at China, for example, and you look at China's behavior and their intent to really disrupt what's been really 75 years of international norms and behaviors and shape that in their favor, and some of their predatory behavior, particularly economically through state-owned enterprise and others with their neighbors, and then their investments across the globe. That is a pretty serious level of competition. And where you should be watching for that is through your acquisition value chains. We all see the foreign investment and so forth and so on. Now, this is not about going to full-scale war with China. It's about setting the conditions so that the United States and our allies and partners who are democratically minded remain in a position of advantage and can prevent great power conflict, just as in the last 75 years, we have been able to prevent great power conflict. Conflicts have occurred, but never a great power conflict. And that's not where we want to go, but what we need to do today is to think our way through that. And they clearly see you, they clearly understand this enterprise, and they clearly see you as a pathway to be able to deny or degrade our ability to project power. So we're going to talk more about that if you'd like. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think I've got a little bit of time for a Q&A, and I'll go wherever you want. I don't know who's got charge of questions. Again, thank you very much for being here today. Okay.
The gentleman over here is going to probably feed some to you.
All right.
We've also got microphones if folks want to come up. So please don't be bashful. I think General Lyons' guidance to me was I prefer to have questions face to face. So
yeah, I prefer questions from the audience if you got them. Is it?
Good morning, sir. We do have some questions coming in from the NDTA app this morning.
Okay.
Secretary McMahon was here yesterday, and he touched briefly on globally integrated logistics. Can you give us your vision of what that looks like going forward? The chairman as the global integrator, of course, but how does that look to you? What is your vision? What does globally integrated logistics mean to this enterprise going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. We spent a little bit of time on this yesterday with the Joint Staff and the Secretary too. The services you might appreciate are working they're multi-domain con-ops, and each of the COCOMs and the geographic regions are equally working their con-ops. Most of those con-ops are very, very focused, particularly in their region or how we're going to employ certain, long-range precision fires or other capabilities. You can fill in the blank, right? But none of them right now are looking across the joint logistics implications, and there are joint logistics implications in all these con-ops. Now, I would tell you that the Deputy Secretary caught me, well, previously, but yesterday as well, we talked a little bit about this, and we're having a discussion about, Transcom's role in the UCP role as a joint deployment and distribution coordinator, and the coordinating authority that comes with that is one piece of it, right? And we're going to really take that on, and in those areas that are inherently joint, consequential outcomes for the joint fight. And then we've got to adjust and emerge the way we conduct our analysis in terms of force sizing and shaping. And my point to the Secretary yesterday was that, the concepts are quite impressive, right? Some of them have significant implications for logistics. So in concepts like dynamic basing, where you begin to deaggregate your resources in a high rate, right? That has an implication for force sizing and shaping for things like mobility, fuel, munitions, and those kinds of things. Other concepts, frankly, could have a reduced logistics requirement. I can think of some of those as well. And ideally, what the deputy, would like to do is he'd like to understand the complete costs associated with the con-op, not just the con-op itself, when he's in the decision calculus about the investment portfolio for the department for the future. So we're committed to work with the deputy and the leadership in the Pentagon, but we still have a little bit of work to do to close down some of those gaps on joint logistics. That'd be the way I'd answer that question. Anybody else?
Sir, again from the application here. With conflicts and battlefields becoming increasingly asymmetric, military unit organizations and tasks and purposes are evolving to, with mobility and deployability. What impacts do you anticipate this will have on transportation needs within the global theater?
What the impacts of what? Say that again.
The evolution of the asymmetric battlefield and the units and how they're evolving to meet the challenges on the battlefield. What impacts does that have on the deployability from Transcom?
Yeah, well, it's somewhat related to the con-ops that are working today. Some you might imagine have greater demand signatures, some perhaps less. But the way I look at it, and the way I look at multi-domain warfare is, again, back to the core purpose, to kind of the nature of logistics aspect, right? What doesn't change is we've got to be able to project and sustain a level of combat power that gives us, strategic reach and so forth and so on. And so if those concepts have increased demands or increased consumption or damage or destruction in the battle space, those correlate to increased logistics requirements to be able to replenish that combat potential that was lost in the fight and to continue to give you the momentum to achieve your strategic objectives. So, it's a demand signal that we're paying attention to, and then we've got to organize ourselves around it, whether it's a greater or lesser demand. But there's definitely an impact on for logistics, and that's the part that's got to be integrated in there. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else got a question?
General? I'm over here, Bill Flynn.
Bill, yes. Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you, General. So listening to you today and listening to Secretary McMahon yesterday, there are so many priorities and so many things that we need to address jointly. how do we prioritize? What are the top three? How do we think about that, and what does that mean for us in commercial industry?
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity going on, that's for sure. And there's a lot of effort, frankly, to look at that activity with the highest priority. And I would just confess to you that the highest priority, in my view, and this is reflected in the Secretary as well, is warfighting readiness. So it's our ability to invest and modernize against a near-peer competitor in an all-domain kind of a fight. So there's this natural tension that you might appreciate, and the world that you might want and the world you get are clearly two different things. And so where the services are really trying to move themselves forward, right, you know, COCOMs like CENTCOM still have a real-world dilemma to deal with in the counter-Iran, the Syria, the Afghanistan. So there's going to be a natural competition for resources on how much you can achieve sustainable readiness and then modernize for the future, an adversary we'll face in the future relative to what we must contend with today. A lot of thought being given to this, understand where the trade spaces are, what we can afford to stop doing, some lower priority things, what we must do to get ready against a high-end fight, and then what we must do to contain, you know, to attend current operations. I think for commercial industry, what that means is you're going to continue to see the department and the joint force continue to be fully engaged, and these concepts like dynamic force employment, right, which if you think about this as, in other words, like strategic maneuver, right? So you're strategically predictable, operationally unpredictable, and this creates a real dilemma for an adversary. But it reinforces that we can come, and it creates, in my view, positions of advantage, right? Physically, psychologically, and temporally, where we continue to move, and we continue to move the joint force. It's very powerful what this community and what Transcom represents, both to our allies and partners, but also as a signature to our potential adversaries. So I think that level of activity will continue regardless of whether it's eastward or westward, to be honest with you. None of the indicators that I have say that the activities and workloads are decreasing. That's not the case, in fact. Yeah, thank you.
Andy here, just real quick.
Here you go.
Right here.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
I was standing up. So we've got General Williams, Daryl Williams here with us today. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of the relationship between DLA, which is Combat Support Agency, and Transcom, and how you all work together to, you know, produce the effects that you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, General Williams and I have been, we were battalion commanders together in the great Marne Division back in the day, and have been good friends ever since. And so there's a great working relationship. And the role that Defense Logistics Agency plays is really monumental when you think about everything that they do for the joint force. And the ability of the joint force to, again, to project and sustain, it's impossible without Defense Logistics Agency. So you know, as you look to the future and you look at this particular issue from the Secretary's perspective, right, and you look at how important logistics in the supply chain is, do you run your supply chain like a business, or do you run your supply chain like it had to operate to support combat operations? And so there's a discussion, and the relationship today is excellent, and the role that DLA plays is monumental. There's a discussion that's circulating as to what do we think about the future, how should we integrate the combat support agencies in a fashion that you know, gives them the operational flavor to make sure that we can get the job done against the strategy. So that's an ongoing discussion today, and I think it's actually, I think there's a lot of unity of thought on this particular issue right now at the very senior levels in the department, DLA and Transcom. Thanks.
Lyons, sir, another question from the app. Along the lines of the previous question, how would you describe the relationship between Transcom and the Department of Transportation, and where do you see that relationship going in the future?
Yeah, I don't know how it could be better, to be honest with you. You had Secretary Chow yesterday. He had a phenomenal time. I got a full report. I really appreciate it. You know, Administrator Busby's here. We have linkages with the Department of Transportation in almost every single area that I can think of. Highways, railways, ports, obviously MARAD maintains the great majority of our Ready Reserve Force fleet. It's just an incredibly good working relationship, and everything that we do in the power projection sense from the CONUS, Continental United States perspective, is integrally linked with the Department of Transportation. Highways for national defense, railways for national defense, seaports for national defense, strategic seaports. And Secretary Chow and all the leadership and Admiral Busby have been incredible partners in every step of the way. So it's a really, I don't know if the relationship's ever been better. It's certainly a great relationship that we have today. And I'm certainly grateful for that. I appreciate that all DOT does for us. And I really appreciated getting to Kings Point, Buzz. That was like, that fired me up for 3 days. What a great, incredibly talented bunch of midshipmen. Anybody else? Can I help anybody else? Yeah.
Sir, another one from the app. How is Transcom working to push the envelope of the possible and increased logistics capabilities through disruptive technologies and processes, including leveraging commercial partner initiatives?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, what I tell people is don't wear blinders to anything. Everything's on the table. Remember the core purpose. The core purpose is to project and sustain the joint force and combat power. And so if people have good ideas about how to do that better, I'm pretty open. I leave it to the components and their services largely to work the platforms. And then at the COCOM level, we're doing a lot of work in the area of digital modernization. How do we modernize that portfolio? How do we get to the cloud? How do we better leverage the data that we have that's largely transactional to get to a place where we have better analytics, machine learning, potentially AI? I think that's an important aspect of where we need to head for the future. I had a discussion yesterday with Jay Raymond. He's the COCOM, there's 11 COCOMs now, and he's COCOM commander for SpaceCom. We're having a discussion about, you know, what does space lend itself to for logistics? And so, you know, there could be some opportunities down the road. I get asked that question quite often. So I think, frankly, if I turn that question around to you, you might have some better ideas, but those are my thoughts on it. All right, anybody else? The Honorable Estevez is coming to the microphone. I apologize for missing the train ride last night. I was really looking forward to that.
First of all, General Lyons, thanks for flipping back and forth from Washington to come out here and talk to this great group. Building on Bill Flynn's question and on Andy's question, so you look at readiness of these component commanders who you have sitting here, but in order to really go to war in a great power war, you need all these companies in this room and their networks, not just their assets. You need the networks. How do you measure the readiness, not just of your organic capability, but really understand the readiness of the companies in this room? Do you have the tools to do that, and how are you doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because there's two answers, I think. One is the clean one, which is how we do it today. But the question mark in my own mind is how should we do it in the future to accommodate for the concepts of operations that will be worked from the services. And so how we do that today is relatively clean. I mean, when we go through the mobility capabilities requirements analysis, we define the demand signal for a strategic lift to move the force based on the highest demand signal that a global integrated base plan brings. And then, you know, we look at what has to be in the military piece of that puzzle. and then what can be rounded out with commercial resources. We look at both the capacity piece, think the conveyances, ships, planes, et cetera. We look at the networks. Do we have the right en-route infrastructure and the nodes? Because the activities all take place in the nodes, right? And that's not just military nodes, to Mr. Esvez's point, that's also commercial nodes. And then ability to control that entire enterprise to get the outputs that you want, allocate scarce resources against strategic priorities. And in that context, right, there's some easy metrics. You can say, is the craft contract, for example, fully subscribed with the number of carriers and the number of iron, and the amount of iron that you needed? And the answer would be yes. And you could say the same thing in the visa underneath the Maritime Security Program, and the answer is yes. And then really, in my own view, what I'm looking for is, do we have any single points of failure? Is there a dependency that's so consequential that there's a single point of failure that somebody, either in a uniformed service or in the military, or in the commercial industry rather, creates a single point of failure? So you want resiliency. You want resiliency in the network that you described, the nodes and the routes. You want resiliency in the carriers. So if I lose one carrier to a cyber attack, I've got other carriers I can go to. And that's basically how the assessment kind of works. And as we look at kind of a comprehensive assessment, which we do, both on the military side and the commercial side, that's how we make that assessment. As we look to the future, I think, when you think about a different way to operate, and the calculus isn't just from port of, embarkation to port of debarkation, it might be a more complicated assessment that says, what do I need to operate in the littoral, right, to create, again, multiple dilemmas for our adversary and multiple options. And so I think we'll have to continue to evolve our analysis to make sure that we are beyond the strategic piece. We also work theater lift and the force sizing on that. But there are some other theater pieces that we'll have to emerge to, I think, as we look to the future. And in the area of mobility, that's clearly ours. I talked to the Deputy Secretary yesterday. I mean, I think in the area of fuel and some other things, we're trying to land where that belongs, but those kinds of things are equally consequential, and we're looking at that end-to-end value chain under the Joint Deployment Coordinator role. So hopefully that answers your question. But in each of these concepts, there is an interface, right, with the commercial providers and the commercial industry. And it affords us a level of flexibility and resiliency that we wouldn't normally have if we didn't have this group here. So it's very important in terms of the level of resiliency that we get. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. My name is Rich Mueller. I'm an airport director at Grant County International Airport, which is in Moses Lake, Washington. We're all owned by the Port of Moses Lake. First, congratulations. It's good to see somebody who was in the Army, to see somebody in the Army standing up there on the stage, so congratulations on that. Second, wanted to say that there is a second train ride tonight, sir, that some of us are on. I'm sure they'd... I'm sorry,
there's a what?
I said there's a second train ride tonight, sir. I'm sure they'd make room for you.
I got to go back to Washington tonight. That's the problem.
I figured that was probably the case. My serious question, though, relates to the fact that we've just been very impressed. We have a lot of military exercises out at our airport. It's an ex-SAC base, so we can have a lot of fun out there. And especially seeing the Army and the Air Force working together and seeing all the equipment moved in and out very efficiently, actually. I guess what I'm trying to get to is that Transcom, the branches work together super well. We have a lot of military exercises that involve bringing equipment in and out for the different branches, but they are not working together yet in the exercises that we've seen as they will on the battlefield. Where do you think Transcom can be that good example all the way down to the field, as it were, where you can demonstrate that the integration that's at the top level can be done right down on the field level, where people have to work together to get the job done to save lives? First, I think, like at our airport where it's practice, so that way when it's in theater, it'll be that much more thorough. Like I said, I see you guys as a fantastic example, so I'd love to see how you can mentor that down the chain.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Thank you.
I was out at Spokane about a week ago, actually, and all that activity that you saw wasn't by accident, by the way. It was choreographed somewhere. you know, and a great operation, Mobility Guardian, over the 3 weeks that AMC led that effort out there. So inside, you know, what I would say is inside the continental United States and the domestic power projection piece, there's a linkage with services and Transcom. And Transcom owns the synchronization of the power projection aspects of the movements. Services own their own force generation, et cetera. And then when you get into the theater commander receives those forces and owns those forces. And the logistics to sustain those forces belongs to the theater commander, and typically they're service components. So there is a, you know, it doesn't have to be a clear organizational design, but there is a level of collaboration and coordination that's quite impressive that makes it work, and it makes it work quite nicely. So I think actually it works pretty well for the most part. There's a couple of edges we can work on. Anyway, I just noticed the clock went to 0, which means I'm out of time. I'm on your break time. But I look forward to seeing you all today. I'll spend a day here before getting back to D.C. And allow me again, please, to say thank you for what you do and your contributions to national defense. This relationship, again, accommodated by the National Defense Transportation Association for 75 years, is really an important relationship. And there are interests, there are business interests and national security interests that intersect in this space. And I'm really grateful to NDTA, Andy, and all that you do. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Thanks for being out here.